friends, welcome back to the homestead. My name is Constance and this video is part of the Home Ec with Constance series that I have been doing. But before we get into the lesson, I just want to give a quick little announcement. In case you have missed it, we are in the process of moving. And so I'm going to be doing a little bit of a pause in the home ec lessons, and we will pick them up again in a couple of weeks once we are finished moving and things are a little bit more settled down and we are in our new location. So we will be having the lesson this week, take a little bit of a pause, and then we will pick right back up where we left off. So if you are not subscribed to my email newsletter, be sure to sign up and I will let everyone know when the home ec is picking back up again and keep you up to date on everything that is happening. Alright, so the lesson that we are doing today is all about cutting up ingredients. When you are reading through a recipe, you will often see terms like dicing, cubing, mincing, sometimes you see julienne. And so I'm just going to cover the 5 most common terms that you will see when you are reading a recipe. Now, sometimes when you are reading through and you see something like cutting something into slices or a dice, sometimes it will give you an idea of what size pieces that the writer of the recipe wants you to cut the ingredients up into. But many times there is no description, so I will go into that a little bit as we go through the 5 different terms. Now before we get started, I have my cutting board. You should always cut your ingredients on a cutting board of some sort when you are chopping things up or cutting them up, simply because a cutting board is going to protect your surface. I'm working here on the counter and I don't want to be using my sharp knife on the counter because it would damage my counter. But a cutting board is made to be cut on and it protects the surface, whether it's your counter, your table, or something like that. And then of course you're going to want a nice sharp knife. Now I like to use a chef's knife like this for pretty much almost all of the things that I cut up in the kitchen because I find this the easiest to use. If you are not comfortable using a chef's knife, you can do most things with a paring knife, which is a much smaller cutting knife. And if that is what you are more comfortable with, that is just fine. The only challenge would be in one of the things that we get into, and I will mention that in a little bit. So today we are going to cut up some potatoes because I thought these would be a great item that we can use to go through the different techniques. So the first thing that we're going to do is slices. And slices is just like it sounds. You're going to take the potato, in this instance, you're going to hold it nice and steady. And the reason I like using my chef's knife is I can put the point of it on my cutting board and I can use it as an anchor point to keep everything stable while I'm cutting. So we're just going to cut off the little pointy end there, and then we would cut our potato into slices, and you would do this according to the recipe. Some recipes might tell you to cut very thick slices, some might say very thin. In this case I'm doing about 1/8 of an inch thick slice, and this would be something that you would use for, say, au gratin potatoes. And so there we have some slices. And of course, anytime that you are cutting things into slices for a recipe, you want to cut everything the same thickness or as close to the same thickness as you can get. That way everything cooks evenly when you are cooking it. So there we have a little stack of potato slices. Now the next term that you might see in a recipe is called julienned. And julienned is not something that you actually see very often, but you do see it from time to time. And the easiest way to julienne an ingredient is to first cut it into slices that are an even thickness, and then you would take a few of them, stack them together, and you would cut them again into strips that are about the same width as the thickness of whatever it is that you just cut, in this case, a potato. Now sometimes this is also called matchsticks, and you can kind of see why right there, because as you can see, they're about the size of a matchstick. So julienne or matchsticks right there is kind of like shoestring potatoes, I think they're called. And so this is called julienned, and that's how you would do that. As a matter of fact, I just julienned some vegetables in a fermenting recipe that I was doing for some kimchi. So the next term that we're going to talk about is cubing. Now, often when you are cubing an ingredient, it could be meat, it could be potatoes. If they don't give you a size of the cube, it's usually going to be about 3/4 to 1 inch. But again, you want to try and keep a consistent size whenever possible. And generally, cubed ingredients are just bite-sized ingredients. But the smaller you cut them, the quicker they're going to cook. So I tend to usually go around a 3/4 of an inch or so. When I'm cubing a potato, one of the things that I like to do is to first cut the potato in half, and we'll just pretend that this end is still there. We would cut it in half, and then I would look at the potato from the side, and if I had a really thick potato, I would cut it again into a really thick slice, and then I would go ahead and cut the 2 slices into chunks. But since we've already kind of cut into this potato, we're just going to go ahead and cut through, and I just cut it into about 3/4 of an inch slices. And then we just turn the slices, and we're going to cut them again about 3/4 of an inch. And of course, when you're cutting something round, you're never going to have exactly the same size, but you just want to kind of get them as close as you can. And so this would be cubed potatoes. The next term, and the most common term that you're going to see in recipes, is diced. And dicing an ingredient is very similar to cubing it, except the pieces are generally going to be a lot smaller. Usually about 1/4 of an inch or so, maybe up to 1/2 an inch in size. And again, if your recipe doesn't give you a description of what size to dice the ingredient into, you can use your best judgment. If it's something like onions or peppers, personally, I like those things to be smaller, and so I would cut them in a smaller dice, unless it told me to leave them in big pieces. So if I was dicing a potato, I would do very similar to what I did to cube it. I would go ahead and cut my potato in half, because giving me a nice flat edge makes it easier to work with when I'm cutting all of the layers. I'm going to take that half, I'm going to set it on its side, I'm going to hold it very firmly, and I'm going to cut the potato into slices that are about a little more than 1/4 of an inch thick. Again, we want to try and keep a consistent thickness with our slices. So now I'm going to take this stack of slices, and this one on top is really, really thin, so I'm just going to cut that separately. I'm going to take this stack and I'm going to cut it into kind of like big julienne, about 1/3 or so inch thick. Now, if you are new to chopping up ingredients like this and you are not comfortable stacking your slices, you can just do one at a time. That is quite all right. I've just been doing this a very long time, so I'm perfectly comfortable stacking my ingredient like this and cutting multiple at once. So now I've turned it the other way, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut across all of those pieces. Again, we're going to try to keep a consistent size so that they are all the same. and this is diced potatoes. Now, two ingredients that a lot of people find very challenging to dice up is onions and bell peppers. Onions can be challenging for some people because of all of the layers inside the onion. But I have a way that I like to cut up my onions that I find makes it very easy. And I have a video where I show just how I dice up onions. I will put a link to that video in the description down below so that you can watch it if you like. I also have one of how I do a bell pepper. It takes the shape of the bell pepper and lets it work for you to make it very easy to cut up. And I will put a link to that video down below as well. So we have talked about slices, julienne, cubes, and diced. The next one we're going to talk about is mincing. And mincing an ingredient means to cut it up just about as small as you possibly can. Mincing is something that many people would just do in a food processor, chopping up an ingredient into very, very small pieces. But you can do it with a knife, and it isn't that hard to do. And so I'm going to show you very quickly how you can mince with a knife. How you can mince it yourself without a food processor. But first, I'm going to take all of these cut up potatoes and kind of get them out of the way. Put them in a bowl. This is something else that you want to make note of when you're cutting up ingredients, is to not crowd your cutting board. So as you cut things, go ahead and put them in a bowl or the pan or the pot and just get them out of your way as you're going. If things aren't ready to go into the pan or pot yet, then just have a little bowl handy so that you can put them in there and get them out of the way. All right, so when it comes to mincing, again, mincing is cutting things into the smallest possible pieces. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to first julienne the ingredient into little pieces. And they don't have to be exactly the same size. You just want to make them kind of small because our goal in the end is small little bits. So once I have cut my ingredient into small little strips like this, I'm going to kind of bunch them together. I'm going to take my knife, and this is where a chef's knife does come in very handy. You could potentially do this with a paring knife, but it would be very, very hard because the curve of this chef's knife is going to make it very easy to do this. Because we're simply going to take the stack of the ingredient, in this case potatoes, we're going to lay the knife on the cutting board, the point on the cutting board, and we're simply going to rock the knife back and forth over the ingredient that we are cutting. And I like to take my fingers from the hand that is not cutting and hold the tip of the knife down just to hold it stable. And we're just going to go back and forth across the ingredient. I'm going to brush these down, bunch the ingredient back together, and do it again. And you can just keep doing this until the pieces are as small as you like them to be. They're not all going to be the same size or shape, and that is just fine. That's not required when it comes to something being minced. Mincing is something that you would do for an ingredient, usually if it's something very strong flavored, like garlic or ginger. And that is minced potato. That is how you would mince. Now there is actually one other term that you might see, and that is simply chopping. And when a recipe says something is to be chopped, it just means to cut it up into bite-sized or smaller pieces, but you don't have to worry about them being the same size or the same shape or anything like that. You just want to cut them up into pieces. And sometimes the recipe will give you an idea of what size, sometimes it doesn't. And so I usually just shoot for And when I see a recipe like that, I usually just try to get it somewhere around diced or a little bit bigger. You just want to think about how big those pieces are when you are taking a bite out of whatever it is that you are cooking. If you are making a soup, you don't want great big pieces of onion or potato that are too big because they won't fit on your spoon. So that is just something to keep in mind when you are cutting up your ingredients of how it is going to be when you eat it. So that is it for today. That is the home ec lesson. And don't forget, it's going to be a couple of weeks before the next lesson is filmed and published because we are again in the middle of moving. So parents, I recommend having your kids help you out cooking in the kitchen. If you make something like my German potato soup, that would be a great recipe to help them practice with their cutting skills, because there's lots of healthy veggies that go into that one. Bring your kids into the kitchen and let them practice and learn along the way. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me here again in the Homestead Kitchen. My name is Constance at Cosmopolitan Cornbread, and I will talk to y'all next time.